The marble was cold. That is the first thing you need to understand about this story. Not the billions. Not the mansion with 14 bedrooms and a wine cellar that cost more than most people's entire lives. The first thing you need to understand is that at 11 o'clock at night, while the rest of that house slept in silk sheets and expensive silence, one woman was on her knees scrubbing someone else's floor. Her name was Giulia. And she was tired in the way that only people who carry too much and say too little ever get tired. Bone tired, soul tired, the kind of tired that does not go away with sleep because the moment you open your eyes, the weight is already there waiting for you. She had a brother, younger, brilliant in the way that breaks your heart because brilliance without money is just a dream with nowhere to live. Every cent she earned, every hour she gave to that house, every morning she woke up before sunrise to press shirts and brew tea, it was all for him, for his school fees, for his future, for the life she had decided he would have even if she had to bleed for it. So she scrubbed, she polished, she said nothing. That was her survival strategy in the Vano house. Say nothing, see everything, keep your head down and your hands busy and pretend you are invisible. Because in a house like that, being invisible was the safest thing a person could be. Now let me tell you about the house. Lorenzo Vano had built an empire from scratch. Tech companies, real estate, private islands that appeared on no public map. The kind of wealth that does not feel real until you are standing inside it, and even then it still feels like a dream someone else is having. At 70 years old, Lorenz owned more of the skyline than most governments ever would. He slept with a loaded revolver on his nightstand. That tells you everything, because a man who has everything and still sleeps with a gun next to his head is not a man who feels safe. He is a man who knows exactly what the people around him are capable of, and the people around him, oh, where do you even begin? Pietro was the son, 42 years old and still acting like a boy who never had to earn anything. By noon every day he already smelled like whiskey and bad decisions. He owed money to people whose names you did not say out loud, gambling debts, the kind that collect interest in ways that had nothing to do with banks. Bianca was the daughter, beautiful in that cold, expensive way. She wore her grief like an accessory and had already started mentally redecorating the mansion before her father had even stopped breathing. She had opinions about the dining room furniture. She had opinions about everything, except loyalty. She had no opinions about that at all. Giulia watched both of them every single day. She watched Pietro pour his morning drink before he even sat down. She watched Bianca walk through rooms calculating their value. She watched them look at their father the way hungry people look at food they are about to take. And she said nothing. She just picked up the cloth and kept cleaning. But that night, the bell rang. Lorenzo's room, 3rd floor, the bell he only used when things were serious. Giulia set down the scrubbing brush, dried her hands on the front of her apron and climbed the stairs. Each step in that house felt like a statement, like the house itself was watching you, like the walls knew your business. She pushed open the door. The room was dim, one lamp burning low on the bedside table, oxygen tubes running under Lorenzo's nose, his chest rising and falling in that careful way, like his body was negotiating with every breath. He was propped up against 3 pillows, and he looked smaller than he had even a week ago, like something was slowly taking pieces of him and not giving them back. And on the nightstand, right next to the lamp, right next to the revolver, was a sealed black envelope. He looked at her when she came in, and the look on his face stopped her completely, because it was not the look of a boss. It was not the look of a man used to giving orders. It was the look of someone who is running out of time and knows it. And underneath that, something she had never seen on his face before, trust, real trust, the kind that costs something. He did not speak right away. He just watched her cross the room and stand at the edge of his bed. Then he reached out one hand and slid the black envelope slowly across the bedsheet toward her. His hands were thinner than she remembered. The rings looked too big now. "When my heart stops, Giulia," he said, and his voice was barely above a whisper, but every word landed like something solid. "Read this to them. Every word. Do not skip a single line. But first you must sign the back." She looked at the envelope, then at him. She wanted to ask why. She wanted to ask what was inside, what she was agreeing to, what signing her name on the back of a sealed envelope meant in a house full of people who would sell each other for the right price. She wanted to say 100 things. Instead, she picked up the pen he was holding out to her, turned the envelope over and signed her name on the back in her small, careful handwriting. She did not know why she never did. That was always the problem. Lorenzo looked at her signature for a long moment. Then he leaned back against the pillows, closed his eyes, and let out a breath that sounded like the end of something. She thought he was sleeping. By the way, if you are watching this right now and you are already hooked, drop in the comments and tell us where in the world you are watching from. We have got people tuning in from everywhere and we love to see it. Now back to Giulia. 3 days later she found out he had not been lying about his heart. The funeral was expensive and cold. That is the only way to describe it. Expensive flowers nobody picked out with love. Expensive suits nobody wore with grief. Expensive silence that had nothing to do with mourning and everything to do with people trying very hard to look like they were not already doing math in their heads. Pietro sat in the front row with his hands folded in his lap like a man practicing patience he did not actually have. His eyes were clear for once. That was the most disturbing thing about him that day. He was sober, completely sober, because this was not a day for whiskey. This was a day for focus. This was a day for money. Bianca sat beside him in red. She had chosen red. At her own father's funeral, she called it burgundy when someone raised an eyebrow. It was red. A deep, expensive, deliberate red that said everything about where her head was and nothing at all about where her heart was. The family lawyer sat in the far corner of the room, sweating through a collar that was one size too small. He kept checking his watch, kept looking at the door, kept looking anywhere except at the casket in the center of the room, where Lorenzo Vano lay still and silent, in a suit he would have hated. And then there was Giulia. She stood near the back in her plain black dress, holding a black envelope that suddenly felt heavier than anything she had ever carried. Every pair of eyes in that room had already found her. Every pair of eyes in that room had already decided what she was. The help, the maid, the girl with the mop who had no business standing anywhere near a room full of this much money. She felt it, all of it. The stares, the whispers behind closed mouths. The way Bianca looked at her like she was something that needed to be removed from the carpet, but she had made a promise. She had signed her name on the back of that envelope, and a woman like Giulia, a woman who had given up sleep and comfort and everything else for the people she loved, did not break promises, not even the ones that scared her. The lawyer cleared his throat and nodded at her. It was time. Giulia walked to the front of the room, and the sound of her footsteps on that floor was the loudest thing in the world. She stopped in front of the gathered family, looked down at the envelope in her hands for exactly 1 second, and then broke the seal. The paper inside was thick, official, the kind of document that does not apologize for what it says. She began to read. Her voice came out steady. She did not know how. She did not know where that steadiness came from because her hands were shaking and her heart was somewhere up in her throat, but her voice held. She read the opening lines, the legal language, the date, the full name, Lorenzo Aurelio Vano. And then she got to the part that mattered. To my son Pietro Vano, she read, I leave the sum of 1 cent. The room did not react immediately. It was like the words had to travel a very long distance before they arrived. Then Pietro laughed. A short, sharp sound, like a cough, like his body rejected what his ears had just heard. To my daughter Bianca Vano, Giulia continued, I leave the sum of 1 cent. And now the silence was different. Now it was the kind of silence that has teeth. Bianca's face did not move. That was the terrifying part. She had the face of a woman who was filing things away, calculating, rearranging. Her jaw was so tight you could see the shape of it shifting under her skin. The rest of the estate, Giulia read on, the villas, the technology holdings, the island properties, the private accounts and all associated assets are to be transferred in full to the Vano Private Foundation. Pietro stood up. Sit down, the lawyer said quietly. Pietro sat down, but his leg was bouncing, his knee going up and down like a machine. Giulia kept reading, because the will was not finished, because Lorenzo Vano, even in death, was not done speaking. However, she said, and her voice dipped slightly on that word because she had read ahead and she knew what was coming, the foundation remains sealed and inactive until the named sole trustee enters into a legal marriage with Lorenzo Vano. Now Pietro looked up. His eyes found the lawyer. The lawyer looked at the floor. Bianca said, very quietly, what does that mean? It was not really a question. It was the sound of a woman trying to hold herself together. Giulia reached into the envelope and pulled out a second document, a marriage certificate, pre-signed, notarized, official in every way that a document can be official. Lorenzo's signature sat at the bottom of it in the heavy dark ink of a man who had planned this down to the last detail. The name on the line next to his was blank. And underneath the certificate, in Lorenzo's own handwriting, in that careful, deliberate script she had seen 100 times on household notes and grocery lists and instructions left on the kitchen counter, was a single paragraph. She read it aloud. The named sole trustee is Giulia Ferrante. To validate this marriage and activate the foundation, Giulia must sign the certificate in the presence of a civil witness. However, to ensure that no coercion has taken place and that this agreement is entered into freely, the following condition must be satisfied. Giulia must remain alone inside the Vano estate for a period of 48 hours beginning the night of the reading. She must remain with the open casket throughout that period. At the conclusion of the 48 hours, if she is unharmed and chooses to proceed, the documents will be processed and the transfer will be complete. The room exploded. Pietro was on his feet. Bianca was speaking over him. The lawyer was saying something about legal process and the order of the room, and nobody was listening to any of it. It was noise, pure ugly noise. The sound of people watching money walk out the door, and in the middle of all of it, Giulia stood still. She folded the marriage certificate carefully. She placed it back inside the envelope. She looked at Pietro, whose face had gone from shock to something much darker. She looked at Bianca, who was gripping the armrest of her chair so hard her knuckles had lost their color. And then Giulia said 4 words. She said them calmly. She said them clearly. She said them in a voice that did not shake even a little bit. I will do it tonight. Nobody spoke. She tucked the envelope under her arm, turned around, and walked back toward the door. Past the stairs, past the whispers. Past the casket and the flowers and the expensive grief of people who had never actually loved the man they were burying. She walked out of that room carrying the weight of a dead man's trust and something else too. Something that had not been there before. Something that felt like steel growing slowly in the center of her chest. Hey, real quick, if you are watching this and you have not subscribed yet, what exactly are you waiting for? This story is just getting started, and trust me, you do not want to miss what happens next. Hit that subscribe button right now. We will be here waiting. The mansion doors closed behind her at sundown, and somewhere deep inside that dark house, in the silence between the old walls, something moved. The first hour was the hardest, not because of the casket, not because of the dark or the silence or the way the old house seemed to breathe around her. The first hour was the hardest because Giulia sat in that study alone with her own thoughts, and her own thoughts were not kind company. She kept asking herself the same question over and over. What are you doing? What are you actually doing sitting in a dead man's house in the middle of the night next to a casket because a piece of paper told you to? She had no answer. She just had the envelope on the desk in front of her and the candles she had lit herself because the electric lights felt wrong somehow, and the sound of the old clock on the wall marking every single second like a slow heartbeat. The casket was open. Lorenzo was in it. Still, peaceful in a way he had never quite managed when he was alive. She had looked at him when she first came in, and then she had looked away, and she had not looked back since. She was not afraid of death. She had sat with her mother when her mother passed. She knew what it looked like, what it asked of you. She was not afraid. She was just very, very alone. She pulled her knees up on the old leather chair and wrapped her arms around them, and she thought about her brother. She thought about his face, the last time she had visited him at school. The way his eyes lit up when he talked about his classes. The way he hugged her too tight like he knew what the hug was costing her, and he wanted her to feel that he knew. She thought about that hug, and she let it hold her the way nothing else in that house could. Hours passed. Midnight came and settled over the mansion like a blanket. And then the lights went out, not gradually, not flickering, all at once, sudden and total, like someone had reached into the dark and pulled a switch. Every candle she had lit was still burning, but beyond the small warm circle of their light there was nothing, just black, deep, absolute swallowing black in every direction. Giulia did not scream. She sat up straight and she listened, because a woman who has spent years being invisible in a house full of dangerous people learns very quickly how to listen, how to separate sounds, how to hear the difference between a house settling and a house being entered. And this house was being entered, glass. Somewhere near the east wing, a single clean break, the kind you make when you have decided not to be careful anymore. Then footsteps, more than one set, moving through the dark with the confidence of people who had grown up in this building and knew every corridor by memory. She knew who it was before she heard the voices. She stood up from the chair slowly and moved behind the desk, putting it between herself and the door. The black envelope was in her hands. She did not know when she had picked it up. She just had it, holding it the way a person holds the one thing they cannot afford to lose. The study door opened. Pietro came in first. He was holding his phone with the flashlight on, pointing it directly at her, and the light was harsh and flat and turned his face into something she did not recognize. He looked nothing like the sloppy, unfocused man she had mopped floors around for years. He looked sharp. He looked decided. And that was so much worse. Bianca stood in the doorway behind him with her arms crossed and her red dress from the funeral still on her body, like she had not even gone home. Like she had been waiting all day for this exact moment. "Give me the envelope," Pietro said. His voice was very quiet. That quietness was the most frightening thing about it. Giulia did not move. He took a step toward her. He told her she did not understand what she was dealing with. He told her the people he owed money to were not the kind of people who waited for legal proceedings. He told her if he did not access that estate soon, there were consequences that went beyond anything a maid from nowhere could imagine. He said maid from nowhere like those words were supposed to cut her down to size. They did not. Bianca spoke from the doorway. She said Giulia should think about herself for once. She said it almost gently, which was the cruelest version of it. She said there would be money in it, enough for her brother, enough to disappear. Just hand over the will, make a statement that Lorenzo was not of sound mind, and walk away clean. Giulia looked at Pietro, then at Bianca. Then she looked at the envelope in her hands, and she thought about a dying man sliding a black envelope across a bedsheet with shaking hands. She thought about the weight of trust from someone who had nothing left to offer except truth. She thought about what it means to be the only honest thing in a room full of rot. She did not hand over the envelope. Pietro moved around the desk toward her, and in that moment something happened that none of them were ready for. A voice came from the shadows behind the casket, calm, dry, familiar in a way that stopped the blood in your veins. "Pietro," the voice said, "you always did have terrible timing." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. And then Lorenzo Vanno stepped out of the dark and into the candlelight. Alive, standing, upright, in a different suit than the one in the casket. His oxygen tubes were gone. His eyes were clear and sharp and full of something that looked very much like the end of a very long patience. Pietro made a sound that was not a word. Bianca grabbed the doorframe. The casket behind Lorenzo was empty. It had always been empty. The body they had buried that afternoon at the cemetery had been a private arrangement, a closed ceremony with a cooperative doctor, and a plan that had taken Lorenzo 2 years to build from the ground up. A heart-slowing compound, a faked death certificate, a loyal physician who owed Lorenzo more than money, all of it. A test, not of Giulia. He had already known what Giulia was made of. She had shown him every single morning for 3 years in the way she worked, and the way she kept her word, and the way she never once asked for more than she had earned. The test was for his children. He needed to see them clearly, not through the fog of hope that parents carry even when they should not. He needed the evidence, clean and undeniable, and caught on the 12 cameras he had installed in every room of that mansion 6 months before he staged his death, including this study. Including this exact moment, Pietro looked at the ceiling, then at his father, then at the ceiling again, like the cameras might disappear if he looked long enough. They did not disappear. By the time the police arrived at the mansion that night, Pietro and Bianca had stopped talking entirely. There was nothing useful left to say. The footage was already secured. The lawyer had already been called. The civil witness who had been waiting quietly in the East Wing guest room for the past 6 hours came out and stood in the study while Giulia, with hands that finally shook, signed her name on the marriage certificate next to Lorenzo's. It was done. Pietro and Bianca were walked out of that mansion before sunrise. The charges that came afterward were not small. Attempted coercion, breaking and entering, criminal conspiracy. The kind of legal weight that does not get reduced with a good lawyer and a good suit. Their names took a long time to recover from what was written next to them in those court documents. Lorenzo lived for 1 more year after that night, not dramatically, not with any grand final gesture. He just lived quietly in a smaller house he chose himself. He drank herbal tea every morning that Giulia still made for him, because some habits carry more love than any legal document ever could. He watched the foundation take shape under her careful hands. He watched her make decisions he could not have made better himself. And on the mornings when she came by, he told her things about the empire, about the mistakes, about what he wished he had done differently. She listened the way she had always listened, completely, without judgment, without agenda. He died in a hospital bed the following spring. She was holding his hand. There was no revolver on the nightstand this time. There was no sealed envelope. There was nothing to fear and nothing to prove and nothing left unsaid. He went the way people go when they have finally put everything in order, quietly. and with something on his face that looked very much like peace. Now listen, if this story hit different for you, if you felt something sitting there watching this, do us a solid and drop a like on this video right now. It takes literally 2 seconds and it means everything to us. We put real work into every single story on this channel, and that little like button is how you say you see it. Go ahead, we will wait. The foundation opened its doors 8 months after Lorenzo passed. The city noticed. The headquarters was a clean modern building in the center of the skyline that Lorenzo had once owned. The kind of building that made people look up when they walked past it. And on the morning of the opening, the CEO sat behind the desk on the top floor with the city spread out through the glass behind her like a painting. She was wearing her uniform, not because she had forgotten who she was now, not because she did not understand the shift that had happened in her life. She wore it because she remembered exactly who she had been the night she sat alone in a dark house with a casket and a black envelope and every reason in the world to run. And she had stayed anyway. Someone knocked on the open office door. An assistant, young, nervous in that first week on the job way. The assistant asked if she wanted to change before the photographers arrived for the opening. Julia looked out at the skyline for a moment. She picked up her cup of herbal tea. She took a slow sip. Then she looked at the assistant and she smiled. Not the small, careful smile she had worn for years in that house. A real one, the kind that starts in the chest. She said,